Hello and welcome to today's summer conversation. I'm so thrilled to be introducing you to a dear friend of mine who I have known, I guess, since 2007. And we met in an online community when we were studying health coach certification. She has since gone on to specialize in functional nutrition. And what is so exciting about this story is not only how people from across the world can come together to form really dear friendships and collaborations, but more than that, the incredible resilience that humans can have no matter what life throws at them. This person who you're going to meet today, and it looks like she's just coming in now, inspires me beyond, I think, anyone I know. You're going to really be moved by her story. This is going to be a short conversation today, but we're going to touch on some high points, and then I'm going to have her on the Connect with Sheila Botelho podcast to go more in depth about more things, more beautiful insights that she has to share about her journey through life, through her practice, through all of the things that she's doing in the world and ways you can connect with her, work with her, all of that kind of stuff. But today is a high point we're going to just touch on, and I'm so excited to have her join me. I'm just going to invite her. Sometimes it does that here on Instagram, so she'll be on in a moment. All right, and here she is, everyone. This is the lovely Mohita Satara. Mohita,
Hi.
I'm so happy to see you live from New York City in the background.
I know. Welcome.
Toronto to New York. Looking incredible as usual.
And
those
you.
Captivating eyes.
Oh.
And everyone, I just want you to know, just get ready, because when you hear not only the story that, you know, Mohita has to share, but also just the way she expresses herself. Mohita, the way you speak is just, it's melodic, it's beautiful, and it's something I've always really, really appreciated about you.
Oh,
now,
sweet.
Let's start at the very beginning though, okay? Hello, everybody who's joining us. By the way, Matilda.
Hi, Jen.
Rich, Tasha. Oh my gosh, Tasha, you got to meet my friend Mohita.
Hi,
this is my friend I'm telling you about. Ah, it's so fun.
Tasha.
Dear friend, my dearest friend from back in the day. And so now Mohita and I met at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. And it was so funny. It's so funny how this happened, because we were supposed to find like an accountability partner. And it's what's really funny is I think both Mohita and I are very self-accountable, like to a fault in a sense. So it's so funny. We're like, oh, okay, we'll do that. But I'm so glad I reached out in a Facebook group, and she was the first one to respond. And from the moment we spoke, it was as if we had known each other for years and years and years, and maybe even lifetimes. Mm-hmm. So, do you remember that time?
There was this long thread of a plethora of people frantically trying to find an accountability buddy, and your message just popped up, and I said yes. And I mean, it could have been anyone. We could have found anyone, and we found each other, and that was, what is it, 4 or 5 years ago? 4 or 5 years ago at this point?
Well, 2017. So whatever that works out to. Yeah, a long time.
Gosh,
it's been a long time.
And you know, Sheila and I have never had the chance to meet in person still, which we
almost did.
We almost did when I was in Canada, right before the pandemic. But it's like you said, it was an immediate just connection, an immediate kindred feeling that this is a sister, this is someone I get, this is someone who sees me, this is someone I love, this is someone I respect. And you're talking about the way I speak. I mean, I could hear you speak and sing hello forever, you know, with your mellifluous voice and with the grace that you offer everybody when they speak. And you have really, and you listen well. You really listen well. Mm-hmm. And you're trust, as I said earlier to you when we were chatting about going back and forth about whether we should do this, I feel very much that I can trust you when we speak, you know, and you guide, and, you know, other people that you've talked to have told you this, but I think you have the facility, the willingness, the aptitude to guide people so deeply and so well and so compassionately and intelligently when you speak to them. So it's my joy and pleasure to be here with you.
Oh, Mohita, thank you. Okay, now I just have to come down from that place that you just took me to. Oh, see what I mean, everyone? I just love hearing her talk. And I didn't mention, but both Mohita and I are singers. And I'm telling you, oh, her voice, like an angel, like so, so beautiful, because your background is in music.
Yes.
Maybe share a little bit about it.
Yeah, I would love to. Gosh, it's nice to talk about that for a change. I grew up singing and performing and being on stage and hosting, and music was a big part of my life. I thought I was going to be a singer and do all the things. I sang for a long time, and then I worked in the music industry, at talent agencies and labels and whatnot. And then I sort of felt a little bit empty because it was never an egoic pursuit for me, and I wanted it to matter and mean something, and to not just change a state, but hopefully change a life. And so I pivoted and decided to do a master's in music-based peace education, and then worked with nonprofits and think tanks designing a curriculum, sort of an ethnomusicological curriculum based on the work of Paulo Freire, critical pedagogy, bell hooks, about what we can do, how can we use music to sort of have conversations amongst people at a simple level that we wouldn't normally have, how we can use it to desocialize ourselves from some of these values that we've been conditioned to believe, all the isms, sexism, classism, racism, you know, all those sorts of things. Sometimes having those conversations can feel very heavy-handed, but music is such a human, life-giving experience that we can all share. So I did that for a while, and I loved it, but then found that I wasn't singing quite as much. And that there were some creative blocks there that I needed to uncover. You know, why didn't I know my sound? Why wasn't I singing more frequently? Why was there an attachment, we all have it, to what other people think? And so I started to uncover that, and then my life changed completely with all the health and with everything else, and that's for a different time. So now I find, through this sort of rather circuitous and inefficient journey my soul has chosen to go on, but you know, potent nonetheless, I now feel like I'm in a place where I'm reclaiming that voice, and I have a much more peaceful and happy and free relationship with it, and it doesn't have to mean all that much, and I can just sing.
Imagine you can just sing. You know what's so interesting? My husband said that to me years and years ago, because I felt like there needed to be an end point. There needed to be an end game.
Yeah.
He's like, why don't you just do it because you love it? Like, why don't you just start a band because you want to? Like, why does it have to happen? I'm like, oh. And I think it's baked into our North American perspective, right? Meanwhile, when I spent time living in Europe years ago, you know, I would ask people, so do you play an instrument? Do you write? Oh, no, not really. And then we'd be sitting around a campfire and they'd all pull out guitars and they were awesome. I'm like, well, no, it's just do this for fun. I'm like, so it's just completely, they knew how to delineate pleasure and goals, and like, why do they have to be separate? Why do they, you know, it can just be who you are.
Absolutely.
And so I love the story of what brought you here. And I mean, you've been living in the States now.
I moved here in 2003 when I was 19.
From
New Delhi, India. I left New Delhi when I was 17. I moved to the south of the country for 2 years, and then I left and came to the US when I was 19. And I will be 40 next year.
And here she is in the Big Apple.
Yes.
Where all the action's happening. And through our journey together, we've certainly, I really believe we have held each other accountable to the things we said we wanted to do. Like, I remember when you were there and guiding me through the journey of, well, you know, do I want to just stay in this sphere of wellness that I was working in at the time, or do I move through into self-care? And you were really a very big part of helping me flesh that out. So I really appreciate that. And it was a great choice that keeps growing and evolving. And then I was there to watch you as you decided you wanted to deepen your connection to functional medicine. And maybe share a little bit, like, high level view of, this health journey you've been on,
Mhm.
and what has prompted you to come into this place of service in your business?
Mm-mm-mm-mm. So there are three or four things that I've known I've always loved. Making music, singing is one of them, performing. The other one is asking people questions, and my curiosity about people is sort of insatiable, and I feel agendaless other than just wanting to know them, you know. And the other thing is, the question that I've always asked is, what does it mean truly to live well? I was exposed to death in my family and in my life very early on. And so death wasn't introduced to me as a normal inevitability that we all experience, but it came as sort of trauma because I lost my dad overnight. And then there were subsequent passings after that. So I've always sat, even as a child, with the question, or with a gnosis that death is here. Death is here always, and not to sound sort of morose about it, but so with that knowledge, then what does it mean to live well? Who dictates that? What does that look like for you? What does that activation feel like for you? And those are the questions I've always asked, even through my art and all the other jobs that I had, in my 20s and whatnot. And then I began to fall sick, and I had many years, and I won't go into too much detail, of sort of seemingly disparate symptoms that no one could understand, inflammatory symptoms, infectious symptoms, things that really sort of took my life from being big and large and vast to very small. And it affected what I could and could not do and the pace of things. And that was a real challenge for me, to always set goals and then to have to pull back and be like, well, I can't do this, and to sort of develop that connection with my body. And it ended up being this sort of differential diagnosis of an autoimmune disease called undifferentiated connective tissue disease. And it really changed my life, and no one could figure it out. No doctors could help. So of course, after the initial sort of consternation and, feeling cantankerous about it, like, wore off, I was like, well, I need to figure this out. And that's what took me to IAN and studying integrative nutrition. And then I realized that nutrition is great, but sometimes there are certain people with very deeply entrenched and chronic, complex health conditions that are not receiving the care, that will not respond to just changing your diet or, adding in more movement or sleeping better. If you tell someone who is got some kind of high-level autoimmune activation, hey, check on your sleep hygiene. That's great, but sometimes, for example, your sleeping off is not the cause of your condition, but almost implicated as an effect of the dysfunction that's going on in the body. So the kind of examination, therefore, that's required in sort of unpacking these very layered illnesses, IAN was beautiful, but wasn't cutting it. So that's what took me to, really, for my own health and well-being, to functional medicine. And functional medicine is a practice of sort of client-centered wellness and not disease-centered care. And it's a model in which clients and practitioners enter into a therapeutic partnership in a collaborative model to together uncover the underlying root causes of downstream distress, or what we present as diagnosable disease in the body. And so it's an integrative approach that views the body as a whole, unlike conventional medical care that operates in silos where you have a specialist for everything. And it kind of lives at the confluence of your genetics and the environmental factors, nutrition, lifestyle, stress, trauma, all these things coming together. But it also draws from the best practices in conventional medical care, which is life-saving and necessary in triage, and then some of these complementary alternative practices. So that change started to really heal my body, that work and that training for myself. And then I found, gosh, I can do so much more. People have sort of written me off, like, oh, I don't know, you just have to mask this to take steroids for the rest of your life. But my life started to open up again, and I started to almost pray for, the people that were struggling the most and the people that were the most sick to find me, and because I was like, I will walk through the fire with you, I will advocate with you, for you, when you are grieving the loss of a life that you thought you'd live, or your life feels small, or you feel stuck in your body, or nothing makes sense. I know how to be. I have now trained myself and lived it, trained myself to have the tools and the techniques and the testing to be that kind of detective that will maybe make links that, you know, your average physician in the current model of healthcare may miss, you know? So that's what I started doing for the last several years, you know, until 2 years ago. And now my practice has shifted vastly. Yeah.
And it's been interesting to see you go through that journey, because we were so consistent about connecting. And then there would be times where it just wasn't possible because your health would take a turn.
Yeah.
And you would need to utterly, completely rest.
Absolutely.
And that was, I knew people before meeting you, I knew people with autoimmune diseases or disorders or sensitivities. And they had said they had it, but they never went into detail, probably because maybe they would feel misunderstood because people don't fully understand it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I met you that I got it. Like, okay. And I know it looks different for everyone.
Yeah.
But I think it's so beautiful that you took your pain and you took the alchemy of even the pain of growing up, dealing with loss, and like molding them together to be able to serve. Like that's molded your heart. And that's why you have such a desire to help people who maybe feel like there's no hope.
Yeah.
Do we ever love that there are people like you who are willing to do that?
Yeah, I really did truly pray for the people that were the sickest and suffering the most, and who felt like there wasn't a place that they could go, because a lot of autoimmune diseases sometimes are invisible and people don't know how to interface with them. You know, your friends mean well, your well-wishers are well-intentioned, but sometimes misguided. They don't have the tools to know, they're not equipped with how to interface with such a complex illness that affects your life in sometimes obvious, but oftentimes subtle and insidious ways. And, you know, and the medical system is not equipped either a lot of the times to really work with these things that take time to unpack and examine and heal. So I really wanted that. And I also grew up, you know, my family's Buddhist, and so it's a form of Japanese Buddhism. And so, you know, it was sort of inculcated into my consciousness, this idea of taking your karma and making it your mission, you know. And, you know, the Stoics talk about it too, where they say sort of like the impediment to action advances the action, or the obstacle is the way, right? And so it was sort of, there was no choice but for me, if I found something, if I found a treasure or a jewel or a nugget of wisdom, I wanted to share it, you know, with, of course, you know, a nuanced understanding that even in the chronic illness world, people's landscapes are very different. So I don't pretend that I have the answers to everybody, or that I'm equipped to be able to help everybody. Certainly not, you know. But I think, yeah, over the last couple of years, even though these ideas of karma and mission, the obstacle is the way, are great, when big things happen, then you start to go even deeper and question, well, then why? That's great, but what about this idea of ease? You know, do things always have to be hard? You know what I mean? Do we always have to identify or have this sort of deep-seated association of nobility with struggle? You know, what if there's an access point into our life experience and into our body that comes with just ease, you know? And what does that look like? You know, not on a perfunctory level, but in practice and stuff. So that is something that I think I've been playing with, particularly in the last 2 years. And as I've changed you know, my suite of offerings for my clients.
And, you know, we've alluded to the last few years and the impact of the last few years. And now everyone listening, watching this can look back on the last few years and say, wow, what a time. We all had different experiences in that time. You were in New York City, where people would say in the States, like, hello, that was very much a hot spot. Funny. And you were having some roller coaster rides with your health while you were there in New York City, but you were really just on it. And then something happened. And it felt like I didn't know if I would ever be able to be in touch with you again. And so I don't know, we can maybe share a very high level version of this. It was very, very big, and it's very But if those of you watching, if you've been watching me for a while or following this channel for a while, you may remember that I had put out like a call to prayer, a call to arms for a dear friend of mine who was really suffering with her health in India. And that was Mohita here. And so Mohita, you went to visit and help out with your mother and your grandmother's health in India in early 2021, correct?
December 2020.
December 2020. And then what happened?
Yeah, so it was funny that I chose to go in the middle of the pandemic because the last few years I felt very resistant to going back to India. You know, my family would have to sort of really beg, borrow, steal sort of to have me to come, and just felt resistant to going. And part of it was my own immune system, part of it, some of it was other stuff, and, you know, my own relationship with my place of origin and whatnot. But for some reason, I felt like in the pandemic, I needed to go, you know. And no one that knew me here could understand why I was making this decision. And it was under the guise, of course, of supporting my mother that had her own health issues at the time, and seeing my 95-year-old grandma who I hadn't seen in a few years that I was very attached to. And I figured, look, if I'm going all the way, I'll spend a couple of months there, because that hasn't happened in years. I haven't been to India for more than 2 weeks at a time. And gosh, I can't even count how many years. So I'm just going to hunker down. And something about, you know, there being the pandemic and not having as much obligation to be out and about and do all the sort of social, society-driven things in India made it easier for me to sort of just go hang out with the family. And so I went December 2020 and figured I would be there for 2 months. You know, maybe my mother would sort of eke out a third month for me, which is typical. And I figured I would come back in the spring. And but then everything changed. And my grandmother was diagnosed with COVID. Her nurse had COVID, and my symptoms began the same week. And so or the same weekend, and we all thought I had COVID. And I will save the story in its entirety for a different time. But what it ended up being was a 6 months of basically living in an intensive care unit, which my whole home had been converted into one, and fighting for my life. And it was, everyone had written me off. The doctors had at some point basically said, we're now just sending prayers. There's nothing more we can do. And it was just IVs and injections and syringes and medicines, and, you know, floating in and out of consciousness, and fevers and rashes and all kinds of mania for sort of 6 acute months. And I was in India for a total of 9, almost 10 months, you know. And long story short, I was able to survive, you know. What it took to survive, there were many moving parts. Of course, I was very fortunate to fall ill in a place like India, where you have access to people being able to come to your home and draw blood and do things, even in the height of the worst surge of the pandemic at that time of COVID in New Delhi, in India, and all of India at that time. Having access to my mother's network, and my mother is a force of nature, so she really came through for me. Obviously, the generosity of so many beautiful people, you know, their resources, their prayers, their wishes, but also knowing that, you know, once I understood, and it was sort of by accident, I'd heard the doctor tell my mother that, you know, he was just sending prayers. My mother didn't know I'd heard that. You know, she thought I was asleep and the door was open. And, you know, I was like living in hazmat suits, so no one even knew that I could really hear anything. But I heard that, and that's when I realized, gosh, you know, my body really is shutting down. It's not responding to anything. And something switched in me, and I was like, there's no way I'm going to go out like this. So I will do whatever I can. And if what I have access to is limited, then I will, in the moments that I'm coherent, will do whatever I can to expand my capacity enough so that I have access to more vision and more tools to be able to get my body to respond to all the interventions that were happening, but that weren't working at that time. So long story short, that endeavor worked in that I was able to wean myself off of a certain, you know, surprise everybody and wean myself off of high-level steroids and come back to the US. And, you know, I fought very hard to sort of come back into my body. And subsequently after that, several other things in my life changed, as you know. And all of a sudden I found myself in a body and in a life that was unrecognizable to me and felt very inhospitable. And I won't go into details here, but essentially every bastion of the life that I had prior to the illness and every semblance of identity that I had pre-illness was gone. So my appearance, my ability to work, my any kind of vitality, health and well-being of important people in my family, my where I was living, my income, my marriage, everything, So all of a sudden everything was gone, and then I was like, okay, here we are. What now?
What?
Hi, Sim.
Everybody is sending you hearts and love. You are a true survivor. And thank you for sharing. Like that's to encapsulate all of that and that like unspeakable experience into how you just did is amazing. And I just really celebrate, yes, you are a survivor, your tenacity, your love of life, and your mission and purpose that you just knew was still there for you to go after. And I remember, always wondering like, oh, maybe there will be a message. And then I also knew that you were in a situation where you could not there was no way you could communicate. And so I would just, whenever inspiration would strike, you'd be like, ooh, I'm going to send this to Mo. I don't know. Is she with us still? It was that tenuous. And so I'll never forget when you finally came to a place where you could actually communicate and just say, hey, I'll update you, but I'm here. I'm like, and I was just, my family will tell you, because, my boys have met you on Zoom. My husband's been at work whenever we've been talking, so he hasn't, but they know about you. And they're like, what is Mom doing running through the house, running and screaming and so excited and cheering? I'm like, no, you guys don't understand. And they were so happy. We were celebrating. And so, of course, not knowing, and maybe you didn't even know what was really to come next, just all of the other challenges you were coming through. But then to finally have a conversation with you, not long after to really reconnect it was like you had like risen from the grave in a sense, like it was that type of feeling. For me.
I'm so fortunate truly to have people like you in my life because I do believe in a power of prayer. Sometimes you can do every intervention in the world and it doesn't, your body doesn't receive it as tonic. You can eat all the kale and broccoli in the world and your body will still reject it and treat it as an antigen, right? You can take every medication in the world and do every movement protocol in the world, but the body still rejects it. And sometimes there are subtle, more energetic shifts, and energetic uncorking that needs to happen, and it's even grander when there's a lot of people, when it's coming from many people instead of just one energy source yourself. And of course, that's a topic for a different time, but I feel like I was the recipient of really too many generosities to count, and that's not lost on me. And of course, it was also very complicated for me because there were people that wanted to know how I was doing, and there were people that, like had contributed to my recovery. And I wasn't in a place for a very long time where I could talk, even when I was when I had taught myself how to walk again, which I had to do for 3 months, is to learn how to walk again, and sort of get back on my feet. There were so many things still in the works. I was still sort of in the trenches, though not critically ill. And many of the things that were happening in my world, some of those were not my stories to tell. So I had to wait until I was in a place where some of those things were somewhat okay. And also really take the time to process and catch up to my own thoughts of what had just happened to all of us in the pandemic and then in my personal life the following year. I didn't want to talk too soon and talk everything out of its truth. You know what I mean? I didn't want the story to take on a mythos of its own that I wasn't living inside of, If there were so many revelations and epiphanies and awakenings and unblockings that had happened in this past year, that it became very important for me to be in the utmost integrity with myself so that anything I said, shared, did or offered then professionally when I was able, really came from a different consciousness than the one prior to this big sort of initiation, this big exile of an illness and what followed after, you know. So I'm grateful that I get to share a little bit here and there now, because there were so many moving parts. There's the how to take care of your physical body, you know. How do you operate for people that are sick? How do you function in your life? It's difficult for most people to aspire to achieve things or to overcome problems. But when you're operating at a deficit, and you're already at a negative 20 or 30, to generate that kind of Herculean will, you know, and life force can be challenging at times. And so to be in the body, and, you know, a lot of wellness practitioners will tell you and doctors will tell you, you know, be in the body, like feel your feelings. And it's very difficult for someone that is in a lot of pain to hear that message. I don't want to be in the body. The body is wrought and written with so much discomfort, things that the average person takes for granted, breathing, you know, using the restroom, sleeping, folding your legs, you know, little tiny things were not working, you know. So one is how to take care of the physical body. The other is, you know, really to expand the definition of what health looks like, which is, I think, what my practice looks like to today, from going beyond, of course, the physical, anatomical, structural, biochemical, beyond the mental and cognitive, psychological, beyond emotional and social, beyond even nutritional and lifestyle and somatic and all those other things, to also include, and this is not, you know, as accepted in the main sort of stream medical world, but to incorporate the archetypal, the narrative, the astral, the spiritual, the cosmic, the etheric, the energetic, and all these other things that sometimes keep us sick for way longer than we realize, you know. And in working through those things, suddenly the medical interventions start to work in your body. And the last piece of that is like learning to live, to be with grief, and learning to ask what it is that you need. Because like I said earlier, people want to know, they want to support you, you know, but they don't know how. And it's very complicated because you feel guilty, you feel angry, you feel ashamed, you feel sad, but you feel entitled in some way, and, you know, to have understanding. And so I felt it was important for me to you know, be diligent and have integrity about examining those things and being self-reflective before really saying anything to anybody, and just saying, I've arrived, I survived, here's my amazing piece of art and work that I've created, and now I'm teaching a brand new group coaching program and I have 8 other clients. Like, it wasn't going to be like that, you know? No.
So many gems can be found in the darkness in our life. And I think the grief, you know, you and I have talked about that countless times, you know, your grief, my grief, over various years and ages and stages of our life, and how there is so much to learn from it. And the number one thing is just what you were saying, like, we are all going to face our own mortality at some point, or the mortality of someone that we love. And whether it hasn't happened yet, I mean, at some point it will. And so coming to terms with it and making friends with it now is so incredibly important. And so, there's so many different points that I think through our time together initially, really we bonded over. And then it's almost like everything got really stirred up for you, for this experience, in such a way that I really see, like, I want to next to go to, like, what are you doing with some of this in your, as you've pivoted your practice, like how is that all working? But I can just imagine the depth and the richness of, like, those things that you just mentioned. That is really true well-being. It's not this one thing, and it's going to look different for everyone. So I really feel like there's like a few books in you to share. You know, I really do. So I'm so grateful to be having this conversation with you. And I know we'll be having another one after this, is what the plan is, to go into maybe delineating some of the experience of what's really risen to the surface. But at this point, I would love for you to share, from what you just stated, how is that now informing on your work, because it is now shifted again?
It's a great question. And so when I came back to the States, I didn't work for a year and a half, partly because I couldn't. I wasn't physically well enough. I also didn't want to make commitments to clients that I take very seriously that I wouldn't be able to keep, and I also knew that because of what I had been through, there were glaring deficits now in my practice, because I had someone that was sort of the poster child for having used functional medicine to live well in spite of the chronic illness and even to reverse it to some degree. And then all of a sudden, this storm came out of seemingly nowhere. Though I believe that in medicine there is no such thing as idiopathic, which is an unknown cause. It just means we're not looking in the right place to find the etiology of the dysfunction, right? And so while I still fully believe in the power of functional medicine, and I still, with my clients, work with people with complex inflammatory conditions, and we look at labs and stool assays and functional testing and at-home kits and nutrition and lifestyle and all these things that, to peel back the layers of, in a systematic way. I also advocate for these clients with their doctors. I help all their various specialists speak to each other who are working in isolated silos, and to, like I said, make those connections that the average doctor is not set up to be able to catch. Having said that, now I've also spent the last year, because I couldn't really do anything else but to deepen my studies, and find teachers. I studied things like, limbic retraining and, somatic work, interventions for the autonomic nervous system, those sorts of things that are also important, right, for someone that is immunodysregulated and has an immune system that is hypervigilant at times that it doesn't mean to, and then exhausted and incapable of performing when there is an actual antigen, But in addition to that, because of sort of this immaculate dismantling of the life that I knew, I've also spent a lot of time studying archetypal healing and deepening my studies into, the tarot and astrology and human design, which I know you love, and the gene keys and all sort of deeper spiritual practices that live at the nexus of the empirical and the esoteric and the material and the metaphysical, and understanding the body beyond just the body, but the subtle bodies and the causal bodies, and how disease first happens at the energetic level before it even gets to the body, Mm-hmm. And I'm not, this is not to say that this is to the exclusion of medical work. I'm not someone who personally has the ethos of just praying away your illness. I mean, if your bile is sluggish and your gallbladder is not working or your liver isn't working, that needs to be addressed. There have to be actual interventions. But like I said earlier, you can do all those other things and still have nothing move the needle, because there's this desire to have a big, expansive new life, but an inability, because you don't have the tools, to sit with, examine, and piece apart some of the blocks that are in the way from that happening. And that can be in blocks in your consciousness, things that are in your unconscious, things that are possibly from lifetimes past, things that are from your ancestral lineage and your place of origin. Mm-hmm. So I've had a deep 2 years of, doing hypnosis and all kinds of inquiry that I've always loved and gravitated towards, but never gave myself the liberty to do because it sounded a little loopy or it wasn't prestigious enough or whatnot, And I realized that work and that element and that lens to the functional medicine piece is integral to who I am as a human. It is the language that I speak, the language of intuition, and the language of always asking yourself the question, what symmetry is marshaling beneath the surface? What is happening there? Are you willing to look? And so I had to ask myself, as I was trying to sort of generate the will to rebrand and do this, start working again, even though I had some fears, is that when everything is taken away, right? When your appearance, when your marriage, when your health, when your ability to earn, when your family, when your titles are taken away, who are you really? And what then is your medicine? Mm-hmm. And so I took a piece of paper and I started just sort of brain dump and mind map things that I thought were my medicine. And most of them sound super trite and corny, but I scribbled them down and I wrote, outside of functional medicine and outside of metaphysical healing and outside of being a singer and all those sorts of things, I think my medicine I wrote down was like water and fire was the oasis, and the spark plug, was the container and the clarifier, was the nurturer and the activator, and it's a medicine I think of like playing in the sunshine because I'm a buoyant person by nature, but also of night vision. I do well in the depths. I'm not afraid of the depths. And I will stand in the fire with my clients or with the people in my life, And finally, I wrote down it was like a medicine of, playfulness but precision, curiosity and commitment to consciousness, and finally, I think of intuition and propulsion, with that. So all of those are guiding me into the programs that I create now and the rubric with which I work now. That includes the functional medicine piece and sort of the more esoteric pieces, because I think those are the things that I think are the reason why I lived and I survived. And it's the reason why I continue to be able to wake up in the morning and feel happy about the travesty that is my life still on many levels, but feel genuine gratitude and curiosity about where I stand in this place without a foothold. And the last thing I will just say, I don't mean to talk so much, is that Tokopa, who I love and I quote often on Instagram, I'm going to paraphrase her poorly, but she said something, and I've shared this with a lot of people, about, don't worship at the altar of your despair, but apprentice yourself to the wound, like apprentice yourself to the darkness, to the wound, to the suffering, because there are gifts in the underworld. The sort of mainstay approach to healing is either vanquish the suffering or transcend the suffering. But there's something beautiful about incendence, which is being in the suffering, being in struggle, and seeing what emerges with vigilance and compassion for self, but then like not worshiping at the altar of your despair, as she says, what emerges is rich.
You see, that's what I'm talking about. This is the Mohita that I have been so grateful to have a connection with over the last number of years, hearing this wisdom come. And what you just said, like that quote, it's totally resonant to what I was just going to say. And that is, so many of us come through a time as you have come through and be left just bitter and stuck in that, but you have transcended it because you've apprenticed the darkness, and as a result you're able to still be with us in a buoyant way, and you are, your whole life is improving, and like you said, it's still a journey, but you are fierce, you are a warrior. And you have come through, but like you were like the love warrior, right? There's that book, The Love Warrior, right?
Yeah.
Like, you really do have that in you. And I feel like everything you came through has so many lessons for people, whether they have serious illnesses or challenges, or they're just moving through life. And I think, many of us know people who we just, you'd love for them just to have a glimpse that this is what is possible when you meet. There is a way to rise above it, and that spiritual connection, again, like you and I have shared so much on the spiritual as well, of like having different faith backgrounds, but yet having such a connection to source, to really, like, there is a greater purpose here at work, and everything we experience happens for a reason. And yet, not to say, like you say, not to say things have to be hard. Like, there is something to be ease. And so this is the thing we're going to keep teasing out through our lifetime, right, Mohita? How do we get to let it be easy? How do we create ease for ourselves and for others?
Yeah. And why do we have this allegiance to feeling like what counts must be difficult? Why do we have an allegiance to perhaps always having the enlightened response where we're not quite so ready, and I'm guilty of that, because there's a self-silencing and an abandoning of self that happens in that process,
Yeah.
which makes it even more difficult to heal. And why is it that, I think people, sometimes we all miss because we're so disembodied, many of us are, and our lives are so discombobulated. We have so much on our plates. We have so much going on. But I think people forget that true vitality and fortification and flow and radiance and well-being is maybe more available to us than we think. And I don't mean to trivialize the challenges that we are facing.
Right.
I say that while we're in the muck,
Yeah.
It's just that how we are, we don't have the spaciousness, the support, the structures, the aptitudes, the willingness, sometimes the fortitude to be able to sit with that muck. You know what I mean? It's a fertile, fecund muck, and
Mm-hmm.
even when it appears like you're in the fallow season, you really are not,
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that's stuff that, we will keep teasing out, like you said, and we'll have glimpses of it and have access to it, and then all of a sudden it'll be gone,
Mm-hmm.
But I do think the body will follow. I think change happens sort of at an energetic level, and matter is denser, and so material forms take a little bit longer to respond,
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay. That's all right.
It is.
So, yeah.
This has been such a I mean, I've just been so looking forward to this. I feel like it's been such an honor and a privilege for me to hear you share and to just bring it all into one space, this overarching experience of what you've had and now where you're headed and what you're up to next. What we can do is we can make sure that we include, after this is posted to Instagram, and then of course once it's on the podcast, I'll make sure I link all the pertinent ways to find and follow you, work with you, be encouraged by you, read some of your poetry, hear some of your beautiful singing when you feel like doing it on your stories. Like it's
Thank you, Mama. I haven't heard you sing in too long.
I know, I need to do it again. I will. But I'm really looking forward to sharing that with everyone. And I really hope that as everyone has been listening, that what you really get from this is like, there is hope no matter where you're at right now. Everybody's going through different things at any given time. And, one thing is for sure, and that is you're still here. And
Yeah.
there's a reason for that. And I'm really grateful that you heard that within yourself, Mohita, to now evolve into something different.
I appreciate that. And I just want to add to people that, we say often that, everything happens for a reason, and it's true. But if you don't, sort of really eat the juices out of whatever it is that's happening, it will be almost for naught.
Yeah.
So, it is sort of imperative at our own pace, without any dogma, that we become good meaning makers, and live our life symbolically so that we can extract the succulence and the jewels of whatever it is that's available to us, in the grittiness and beauty of our circumstances, because that is something that is usable and can be efficacious medicine for yourself and for others. And then it's really happening for a reason, So.
Oh, that is such a key point. We're going to take that one home for sure.
Yeah.
And now, like, the key is now, let's think about that when we're actually going through the thing.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Let's all remember the conversation. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, you come through it, and the fact that we can actually just have some levity and laugh and, not just be stuck in like the darkness. We can take the juices from that and move forward and know that once again in life, we're always going to be facing that kind of, that little path that goes winding through all the different emotions, and they all exist for a reason. And it's up to us to bring the meaning. I love that. Be meaning makers.
Yeah, like what we choose to ascribe meaning to is based a lot of on our conditioning and our own blocks and the programs that run our life. And sometimes we lose our feeling of free will because of these programs that are running our life. You know what I mean? And so even Jung says, it's like the unconscious will always exact its dues and it's always impacting you. And so what is unconscious, like shows up as fate in our life. And it isn't that I don't believe in some element of fate and destiny, but I think that we have a lot more room to play and a lot more room to make meaning than sometimes we feel like we can in moments of crisis. And I think that's one of the things that I love about you too, is that you're so good as well and so graceful and poised and, at wielding that sword fiercely, and also sitting with the darkness, but having levity and buoyancy and keeping your face towards the sunshine, as I think Whitman says, and then the shadows will fall behind you, And so, let's try and let's really, it sounds again trite, but let's let each other know that, we love each other and we're interested in knowing what support looks like to you. And even if you don't know what support looks like to you, I'll figure it out with you, like what does supporting somebody look like truly, so.
Exactly. Oh, Mohita, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me.
For sharing from your heart out of something that, it's not easy to share from. Let's face it, we're almost opening up an old chapter from a difficult time, but I'm grateful that you're able to do it. And I feel like we are better for it. And I really look forward to just seeing what you create next, and mostly just to see you here, living, buoyant, light-filled, and, living your purpose and having some joy.
Yes. Oh, of course. Absolutely. There is so much joy to be had. Let's not forget.
Let's always remember it. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us here today. And like I mentioned, I will put all of the links and the ways to find and follow Mohita below, and also in the show notes on the podcast. Make sure you share this if you felt it really touched you. We're having some beautiful comments here.
Hi, Raccoon. Oh my goodness, so long. Thank you. I haven't seen any comments. Thank you, guys. I love you all.
So good. So Mohita, I appreciate you. And I'm going to be chatting with you again soon. And everybody watch for this on the podcast, but we will probably do a follow-up to this going into some other type of topics, because boy, we can really go places. We
always say, I know, we were like, why aren't we recording all of our conversations, our Zoom calls for the last 5-6 years?
It would be an incredible mini-series.
Have them all pre-batched, sort of ready to go for a mini-series. Yeah, but we can talk, and I love that I have that space with you. I really cherish it beyond, maybe more than I express.
Oh, thank you, and I cherish it also. Well, everybody, thanks for listening, and Mohita, I will see you in another conversation.
See you soon. I love you. Thank you.
I love you. Take care, everybody.
Bye. Bye.